Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to talk about account progression and more specifically your account progression this time. And I'm going to be basically going through the pieces of content, piece of permanent content that we have available in Marvel Concept Champions. And I'm going to be going through my opinions in what order you kind of should be completing them or what I find more difficult as to compare to other content in the game. And first off, the list is going to start from Act 5 100%. So I'm not going to divide Act 5 any kind of like further. That is going to be kind of the bottom line progression that we're going to be discussing here. Obviously Act 5, all is fairly kind of level in terms of difficulty, starting from 5.2, especially from 5.24 till 5.46, which is like the final of it. So 5.1 is still dead easy, super easy to 100% that. 5.2 you're gonna start to have your like first trouble nodes, first problems, first real nodes where you will have to learn how to deal with these issues, such as Bane and Masochism to be in particular. Everything else up until this point has been fairly kind of like game handling you with kiddie gloves kind of like thing. Bane and Masochism will be those nodes that where you have to learn how to play against those nodes. Not that you have right or wrong champions, because you can use many champions against those nodes. Obviously there are champions do better, champions do worse, but in particular those are the first two nodes that force you to play differently and that kind of like help to develop you as a player. So that is where I'm at with Act 5. 100%, that is kind of like the initial content that I kind of urge everybody to explore fully, because that will also reward you with your first rank 5 champion. By the time Collector obviously came out, Collector is still a pain in the bottom fight. Nobody likes to fight him. It is cash grabby, it's super random, he goes unstoppable. It will likely cost you resources, revives, maybe units. Can't escape it, just man up, deal with it, push past it. Search for helpful tips on YouTube how to deal with 5.2, 5.4, whichever fight you do get stuck on. There's quite a lot of videos about that. And yeah, that is like the first kind of like serious content that every kind of like progressing player, in my opinion, should aim to finish. And that is where we're gonna start today's video off. Now, first things first, straight after Act 5, 100%, I will urge everybody to do 6.1 first clear. Now, this is also coming in with like a condition, and I'm going to put a star next to it, and that condition is if you have a decent ranked up bleed immune champion. Now, Act 5 is basically the strength level of maxed out 4 stars, rank 3, 5 stars. That is the maximum kind of like strongest champions that we had when Act 5 was coming out. By the time of 5.4 we had some rank 4s, not many, but when 5.2 came out we pretty much had one rank 4 champion maybe, and everything was cleared with 4-star champions. 4-star champions are more than adequate and enough, or rank 3, 5 stars to explore Act 5. Now, 6.1, obviously the first problem is the limitation of 5-star and above champions only. Therefore, you will have to be careful with your roster. And if you are a player that's currently running through Act 5, one of the first things I would prioritize for you to rank up is the first decently hard hitting bleed immune champion, or champion like Ghost or whoever that can deal with biohazard on 615 crossbones. That is the only kind of roadblock on your way to becoming Cavalier after you have explored Act 5. And becoming Cavalier is something you want to do extremely quickly on your account, because that will enable your account to get the better deals, but get the better rewards, basically be in the better bracket. And that is one of the things you want to knock out as early as possible. Granted, if you have at least 5, 6, 5 stars, and one of them is decently hard hitting bleed immune champion. For instance, Iceman can get that crossbones down as well, but it will probably take you good 10-15 revives at the rank 3. I know I did a couple of times, it was not pretty, but the rank 3 Iceman can do as well. And then obviously multitude of champions if you have them ranked up at rank 4 or higher. But having explored Act 5, you will guarantee have access to at least one rank 5 champion and a couple of rank 4s. Therefore, whenever you rank up, do keep in consideration, always in back of your mind, whilst running through Act 5, that you will need something for the crossbones. And if you have done your homework, you will have absolutely no problems pushing out first initial completion of 6.1, which in fact, just FYI, is not all that difficult, especially if you are not kind of like above spending some revives, few resources. Just push it through, get it done, and then you can move on to the rest of the content, because then you will have earned your Cavalier title, and that is important progression piece currently in the content. So that is, in my opinion, the content that you should be completing first. Now we can move on, and then we have 3 variants. Now, variant number 1, in my opinion, is quite a bit more difficult than variant number 2 and 3, and so therefore I will mark it obviously always at the top as a higher, more difficult content. Variant 2 and 3 are fairly similar to the terms of difficulty, but variant 3 I will mark down as the easiest one, simply due to the fact that it is 3 quests shorter, therefore it will be much quicker for you to complete. Now, when I rank these variants in specific order, it obviously, especially for variant 2 and 3, largely also depends on your roster. If you have more extra large champion and hardly anything in tech department, for instance, then variant 2 is the one you want to focus before variant 3. But otherwise, like as a generic rule of thumb, variant 3 will be considered to be the one that's easier to beat. And yeah, so we're going to start with a variant 3 first completion there. Because it is in fact just 6 quests, it's not too difficult to do. And if you have even a 4-star Sentinel, 4-star Ghost, these 2 4-stars run through about 90% of the content, and then you're going to have to find a few set of answers to kind of like trouble nodes. But when you're only completing it, you will pretty much be able to do it all with a Ghost and Sentinel and a bunch of other 4-stars. Definitely nothing kind of like too tricky to run first completion of 6 quests with maxed out 4-star champions. And then we're gonna go on, as I mentioned, to variant 2 first completion. Once again, it's not too difficult to run through variant 2, especially because there are not only extra large champions that work, there's a plethora of other champions that do fantastic work in variant 2, like Quake, Archangel, Captain America, Infinity War, Domino, so on and so forth. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of good options for clearing variant 2, especially when you only have to push through the content once to have your access to basically a free rank 4 champion. And whilst you're doing these first completions and variants, you will be kind of like noticing quite quick and drastic and huge progression in your account, just because you will be getting these rank 2 to 3 gems for 5 stars. You will be getting these 3 to 4 gems as well, and that will help you kind of immensely grow your roster quite quickly. And then as a next point to complete, as I mentioned before, is going to be variant 1 initial completion. Now variant 1 is quite different beast when it comes to variant 2 and 3. Variant 1 is much more harsh because it also completely segregates your roster in 3 groups in between skill and mutant champions, which is kind of like the easier bit. So if you have been following everything up until now, and if you had variant 1 in mind, skill and mutant champions are the ones you want to pay least amount of attention to a degree, just because tech and mystic and science and cosmic chapters are much more harder. However, you do want to kind of keep a track of progression on your account, and you do not want to get carried away ranking 1 class or 3 classes, and definitely whatever you do not kind of like leave whole subset of classes like skill and mutant completely aside from your attention. When you are progressing, going through your variants, doing Act 5, keep in mind what champions you have ranked and try to be as diverse when it comes to classes and their roles as possible. Now, once you have done variant 1 first completion, I think a next logical step that where I would put it would be Labyrinth of Legend first completion. Now, Labyrinth of Legend first completion might come a lot earlier. Might come straight after Act 5. It all depends who you have ranked. I am ranking it up a bit higher here, above variant 1, only because at this point you will 100% guaranteed have had a chance to rank up a decent champion for Labyrinth. If one of your first rank 4s and rank 5s is a labyrinth clearing god like Aegon or Domino or Ghost, you can tackle this content a lot earlier. If your first rank 5, for instance, from completing Act 5 is Ghost, go straight in the Labyrinth. You can do initial completion super easy, cheaply. only kind of like difference there between any other content is the length of it. Other than that, Labyrinth first clear is not difficult. Just make sure you do your homework first. You know how the rules work in Labyrinth, what Maestro does. Check out the map, know which champions you're going to be facing, so on and so forth. But typically, Labyrinth is for most part kind of like 1 or 2 champion show, where you have one ranked up champion, a bunch of synergies with them, and that's it. It's go. And yeah, the fights itself are not hard, but it's just lengthier. It is, however, important experience for a player, and it is one of the content that I definitely encourage everybody to do, regardless whether you find the rewards worth it or not at this point, just because it will help you progress as a player. It will build up your endurance, attention, reaction time, stuff like that. Once you start doing Labyrinth, you will notice things about the game that before maybe might not have been as obvious. So I place Labyrinth of Legend first clear over there, and next we're gonna return to our variants. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to go to variant 3 100%, just because it is shorter of the variants. It has very great rewards. It has a 5-star for reward, 45 awake rank up gem, and another bunch of stuff. But that is the main thing. You're going to have another rank 5 there, guaranteed from a random class. Also, variant 3 is only 6 quests. It's not long. These quests are even much shorter than like variant 1, for instance. There, once again, the condition is that you do have to have some sort of tech champions that are performing decently. Ideally, if you have Sentinel, even as a 4-star, do take him everywhere as much as you can. He will do great for you. Ghost 4 or 5-star will be fantastic for that content. A lot of cheese is possible with even a 4-star Stark Enhanced Spider-Man. Other than that, you can use your full roster in there. But you're gonna have a bit of attack penalties on them. However, it's not the worst of the things to deal with. And yeah, variant 3 is kind of fairly generically inclusive, and you can use literally all your roster, and at this point it should not be too difficult to fully explore variant 3. Now variant 2 is coming up straight afterwards, and again, as I mentioned before, variant 2 might be the one that's easier for you depending on what champions you have ranked or not. And variant 2 overall was not that tricky. There are a couple of annoying dominoes and corgs on like spites and whatnot, but there is a lot of information on YouTube. Once again, 4-stars are perfectly legal in this content, so even your ranked up 4-stars can be of use. And yeah, so if you are struggling with anything there, look for help in YouTube. It's not that big of a deal to compete there. And next kind of like piece that I'm going to be putting in is going to be 6.2 initial completion. I'm kind of thinking where I'd put 6.2 initial completion here or higher. However, I will mark it down here just because 6.2 in itself isn't too bad. Vast majority of the maps are easy. 6.21 dead easy. 6.22 if you have answer for Sinister Boss. That's where you might struggle with. However, I do think that at that point you should have an answer to it. It might be a bit tricky, you might get stuck on it, but at the same point, if you have Medusa, Hyperion, Warlock, Captain Marvel movie, Heimdall, you will find some answers to it. Might be a bit tricky. Again, if you do not have decent answers to these kind of like couple of fights, leave it be. However, there is another problem. Champion Boss. Champion Boss is skill intensive fight. Champion Boss is like the first and actually pretty much the only one piece of content that is on pass-fail basis, where you as a player get tested much more than ever before. It's simple as that. Whether you are good enough as a player, not to mention that you have to have decent roster options for him, and there are quite ways to defeat him. There is still She-Hulk, there is Dr. Voodoo, Hood, there is Morningstar, Symbiote Supreme, Black Widow, Clairvoyant. There might not be the greatest amount of options, but if you have completed all this content, as mentioned before, you should have some answers for that. However, the last 10% of the champion boss is pretty much the most technical piece of content that we have in the game, and if you do not feel confident about your ability to defeat the champion, don't do it. Stay away from this content. It won't be easy. It will test you as a player. You will get frustrated. Do practice, do duel, don't go in kind of like easy going, easy minded, I'll be fine kind of thing. No, you won't be fine. I've seen people waste thousands of units and back out on the last quest just because that is the most technical bit of content where you as a player get tested. Not your roster, nothing else, not how many units you can afford, but you. Because if you play well, you can get through it with 0 units or, I don't know, 40 units. But if you can't get it done, you're going to spend thousands of units and you're still not going to get it done. So before entering here, there is a huge warning label: practice, practice, practice. Make sure you got it down, then do it. And yeah. Now, moving on next, in 4th spot, I'm going to put on 6.1, 100%. 6.1, 100% is going to be, again, kind of slightly debatable. Overall, 6.1 is fairly easy. Definitely easier than Variant or whatever, and 6.2. 6.1 was fairly reasonable map, slightly annoying global nodes. There are a couple of fights you do need to be wary about, like Caustic Temper and buffed up Symbiote Supreme, and a few more fights where you will need more specific answers. However, if you have actually followed through this list, I am confident that at this point you will have answers for the champions that you are looking for. But once again, that limitation of 4-star champions is going to be messing with you, is going to be giving you a hard time. So if you are basically struggling to find answers for specific fights here, skip it. Don't stress it. Wait, eventually they will come. Don't kind of like force through, because nodes like Caustic Temper, for instance, certain fights you can't force through. Same as buffed up. If you don't have champions that can deal with that Symbiote Supreme, there's just not much you can do. So being frustrated about it, leave it on back burner, do as much as you can, move on to a different piece of content. However, I do rate it 6.1, 100% as like the 4th, probably most difficult piece of content in the game. Then, did I miss something? Yes, oh no, we're good. So 6.1, 100%. Then we have 3 most difficult piece of content to explore fully in this game, which will at number 3 be LOL 100%. LOL 100% is a fairly simple, straightforward compared to the rest of the content at this point. It's just long. It will test you as a player. Once again, you do have to have appropriate champions. Now, there are many people who say that the rewards are not really as worth it anymore, but they're still good, and they're still good to get. The generic Awakening Gem is still extremely rare at this point. Also, when you're playing up high here, when you are able to fully explore 6.1 and Variant 2 and 3, you should have a roster to be able to handle Labyrinth, especially since Labyrinth largely can be handled by like a single or a couple of champions in your roster, and then you're going to have to figure out few supporting fights like Electro or Guillotine and Abomination, so on and so forth. But overall, Labyrinth isn't that difficult. It's just long. But however, once again, it's great for you as a player. It's great for you to learn throughout these fights how to retain your attention, how to improve your reaction speed of those random evades. There's a lot you can learn in Labyrinth, and I definitely suggest anybody who has progressed this far in the game, if you for whatever reason have kind of like put off doing Labyrinth 100%, I still encourage you getting back in there. Do path by path, do take your time, do a path in between exploring something else, whatever, just get it done. It does feel good to finish it. There is still a decent chunk of rewards associated to it, but more so than anything else, it will help you improve as a player, to find solutions for these problems, to plan out your teams, to map it. It's just an interesting process, and if you have a roster for it, it's definitely not expensive anymore. You can explore everything in there for a couple of audience with a relatively decent roster of multiple rank 5s, which you should be having at this point if you have explored everything 100%, as we have been talking up until now. Now, second most difficult piece of content. Second most difficult piece of content, in my opinion, is Variant 1, 100%. Why I rank it above Labyrinth of Legends is quite simple, because it's much more skill intensive, much more knowledge based. You will need to know what you need for which path. It also tests your roster a lot more, because you will need champions of all classes basically ranked up, and it's not nowhere near as long as Labyrinth, I think, but it's still quite long, because variant 1 just had an absurd amount of path when you compare it to variants 2 and 3. And yeah, variants 2 and 3 are quite noticeably shorter than variant 1 and quite noticeably easier. Mainly for whatever reason, the attack in variant 1 opponents is crazy. If you make a slip up even with a rank 4, rank 5 champion, quite often one combo or two combos will knock you out. So that is kind of like crazy level of punishment that opponents are able to dish out. And once again, there's a lot of really kind of sketchy, tricky, annoying fights. And what's going to make it more annoying is because you will not be able to use vast majority of your roster. There's going to be a lot of fights where you're going to think, if only I could bring in this champion, but you can't. You're only going to be reserved to, let's say, Mystic and Tech champions. And Mystic and Tech chapter, which is chapter 2, is actually, in my opinion, one of the harder ones, just because if you don't have highly ranked up magic there, and like stack Spider-Man, or either way, there's very few champions that can do well, because Tech and Mystic classes happen to be probably two of the weaker ones in the game, and there aren't just that many great champions, and if you do not have them, you will struggle a lot. So this is another piece of content where you do need to have a roster check, see what you can do, what you can't do as much as you can, leave the things that you can't, get back to it later, don't kill yourself over it. It is one of the more difficult pieces of content released ever. I find it fun, I find it interesting, I definitely genuinely enjoy playing in variant 1, but I can understand how it can be frustrating and difficult and close to impossible to pass if you don't have appropriate champions with all its degenerations, masochism, spite, you name it. Like, if it's something annoying and nasty, that's probably going to be in variant 1 there. So definitely be very cautious when trying to explore variant 1. Ask for help. Look at the YouTube videos, look what people did, do your research, don't jump in there. It's a very difficult piece of content. And by far, the most difficult piece of content in-game to date is 6.2. 6.2 100% has gone to extraordinary lengths to torture the players. The global nodes are fun. Some of the quests you will be pretty much able to cheese through if you have appropriate champions. Overall, however, when you look at 6.25 and 6.26, it's crazy. It's crazy. They went above and beyond what they expected. People who made global nodes in 6.2 did a great job. They're definitely fun nodes, challenging nodes, interesting ways to play around them. There's everything you want in an endgame piece of content. However, people who designed the path, who designed the encounters and placed the nodes on the encounters, were a sadistic bunch of a-holes. They definitely went too overboard. It is extremely roster specific. It's definitely designed to top, I don't know, 1%, 2% in the game. When I was clearing it, I was filling holes in my roster. Now, whether that would be the case right now, because I have filled some of them, I'm not too sure. I'm sure I could do a lot better than I did initially. However, it's hard. No matter how you spin it, no matter how great your champions are, even if you have everything pretty much ranked up, it's going to be hard just because of the gates, of the limitations, the champion penalties. It's just a completely different beast that feels cheap, cash grabby, and what have you. There are several just pay tolls, or basically there are nodes that say pay to pass. There's everything that I dislike about the recent directions about the game you can find in there, and worse, pretty much. So yeah, happy days. That is definitely the content you should stay away from until you completed everything else on this list, because it will be head and shoulders above that. So that is a difficulty difference there. Everything else is kind of like progressing decently, and then there's quite a huge jump in demand of your roster, in demand of your skill, in demand of your aptitude as a player, and logical kind of thinking powers when it comes to forming your teams, because you'll have so many gates and limitations and frustrations that you basically, once you get everything else done, do think twice before if you are ready to do 6.2, because it will not be easy. Obviously, exploring it feels great. Now we're waiting for 6.3. I can't wait to see what's in store for me. But I think that will about sum it up. That will do for today. I think I'm fairly happy with my list. I was kind of like making it along as I go, along. to a degree. But yeah, that is anyways what I think about endgame content, in what order you should be trying to complete it. Obviously, as I mentioned, some things might vary slight up and down. For instance, 6.1, depending when you get a beefed up Bleed Immune champion. Labyrinth of Legends first clear might come straight after Act 5, for instance, if you have a great Labyrinth of Legends champion. So on and so forth. Obviously, these things are interchangeable. However, my thought process, how I was ranking them, still should prove to be quite useful, I think, to many of you, and I hope it is. And with that, I will be done for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys find it useful. If you do, forward it to your mates and alliance mates and friends and whatever not. And I will catch you guys soon. Don't forget to hit that like, sub, and all the other buttons. See ya.